So it's my pleasure to present Dr. Jessica Bacon. She's an associate professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Montclair State University. And Dr. Bacon will present in, the connection between inclusion and positive disability identity. And we're so happy to have her here for the first time at our symposium. Dr. Bacon coordinates programs in inclusive education and co-founded the Increasing Access to College Project and the Certificate of General Education Studies, both of which open inclusive higher education opportunities to people with intellectual disability. Informed by disability studies, her research explores inclusive education through a critical and intersectional lens, with recent work appearing in journals such as the International Journal of Inclusive Education and Critical Education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Bacon.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I am going to share my screen. And I also put a link to my slides in the chat if you're interested in following along. So I will get started. You can all see my screen okay? Great. All right, thank you. So, as the nice introduction, I'm Jessica Bacon, and I work at Montclair State. And I think you all heard from one of my colleagues, Dr. Lovani, earlier. We work closely together in many ways as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all about individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and how to think about inclusion for this group of people in our schools, on our college campuses, and in our society more broadly. So here's my plan, is to start off kind of setting a foundational understanding of intellectual disability and some different ways of thinking about that term and concept and identity group, and then talk a little bit about the state of inclusion for this group of people and a little bit on the research on inclusion. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the programs that were referred to at Montclair State University, and how mental health can be supported through inclusive practices. So, to start us off, I just kind of wanted to give us to start the ways that the medical community and the educational communities define intellectual disability, and then I'm going to kind of contrast and give us some other perspectives on how to understand and think about the variability of people and identities and groups within this community. So the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disability Education Act, defines intellectual disability as significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior and manifested during the developmental period that adversely affect a child's educational performance. So you can see that's a highly deficit-oriented framing of this experience and disability. In this definition, an individual must present and be defined for the ages of 22. Historically, we relied mostly on IQ tests to define ID, although now it can not only, the law requires that there must be multiple assessments, including adaptive functioning assessments. In the United States, approximately 6.5 million people are defined as having an intellectual and or developmental disability. So, another framework that is commonly used in disability studies, and perhaps Dr. Lavani also covered this earlier, I'm not sure, to contrast the medical model definition that we just heard, which really only sees disability as a problem occurring in the body and in the mind. So through a medical model perspective, we see that the person with a disability has many deficits. We see this in a really negative way. And we see that the whole problem of disability resides in the body and the mind of the person. And that, doctors and medical experts are the ones to diagnose disability, and professionals such as teachers, as medical experts, as therapists are the ones to sort of alleviate or ameliorate the so-called problem of disability. Um, However, many people with disabilities, disability rights activists, civil rights activists, and people in the field of disability studies like to think about disability in other ways. And this is the social model understanding of disability, which looks at the main problem. It understands that there is difference, there is variability in humans, right? People are different in how they process informations, how their bodies are different, their minds are different. Um, Yet the main problems of having a disability are not in the body, but are in society. So they are physical and environmental barriers, they are organizational barriers and stringent bureaucracies. There are barriers around how we communicate and don't use inaccessible information. And a major barrier is also stigma, attitudinal barriers, ableism. And so this is another way of understanding disability besides the medical model. Um, I also think it's helpful to think about the historical context and also the international context of this category. Not all countries rely on a similar definition of intellectual disability by any means. Schools in different schooling systems in other countries evaluate and define disability really differently. And also, historically, just in the United States, we have shifted our definitions over time. I always find that this is a pretty profound way of understanding how socially constructed or contextually constructed this category really is. So in 1973, there was actually a change in how we in the US defined the definition of what was then called mental retardation. Um, and a major reason, impetus for this was that a lot of people were qualifying for services and it was costing the government a lot of financial resources. Also, a lot of people were being mislabeled because of language differences or because of race, which still actually occurs. So in 1973, a committee of experts who worked for AMR revised the definition, and they decided that the significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning, which was the language at the time, was to be determined by a score of at least two standard deviations below the mean on an IQ test. So this meant at the time that the cutoff point for MR was moved downwards from 85 to 70. So this change actually lowered the percentage of the population that might have been identified from our MR from 16% to 2.25%. So basically, thousands and thousands of people were quote unquote cured of their mental retardation overnight, because of how society shifted definitions due to larger, socio-political issues going on. I like Allison Carey's definition, who wrote a great book on the history of intellectual disability in the U.S., who writes, ID is a contested social constructed. It is not an objective biological condition. Also, the characteristics of people with ID are myriad and disparate and cannot be understood by a clinical definition. Um, so that's sort of a little context for um, the kind of the state we are in New Jersey and the US for educating people with intellectual disabilities. So we segregate people with intellectual disabilities at extremely high rates in the United States. And the increase towards inclusion is actually has been very, very slow for this particular category of people. So we only include about 18% across the country of people with intellectual disability labels in schools. And so, um, despite the fact that there is a lot of fluidity and ability and identity, the practices of segregation mean that there is a really, really strong distinction between who is considered to have an intellectual disability and who is not. There's also incredibly less access to high-level curriculum, and social experiences for people when they are segregated in our classrooms. Also, Not only is the category of intellectual disability highly segregated across the country, but New Jersey is actually the worst state in the country. I'm not sure if this has been talked about yet today, but we segregate more people in New Jersey. This is, you can see, this is actually the link to this, which is all embedded. The link is embedded in, but you can see we are the only state in the country that is yellow, which means we are the only state that segregates more students with disabilities than we include. And we segregate more students with intellectual disabilities than most states in the country, too. So it is often a very quote unquote, natural experience, which it shouldn't be, right? But we assume many of us who live in New Jersey, who grew up in New Jersey, who work in New Jersey, that segregation is just how education works. But you can see that New Jersey is really, really behind in these issues and in this area. And also, sorry, I'm just skipped ahead. We have really big issues with opportunities for employment, especially integrated and competitive employment opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. So overall, the labor force participation rate in 2024 was about 78% for all people with or without disabilities. For people with disabilities overall, all disability categories, the labor force participation rate is still quite low at about 40%, but you can see that only about 18% of working age adults supported by state IDD or intellectual and developmental disability agencies were employed in paid jobs. So you can see how few people are accessing what's often called competitive or integrated employment. Um, Also, our states invest much more heavily in segregated employment and rehabilitation centers, sheltered workshops, and so on, than they do in the services that allow people to have integrated employment and integrated adult lives. The other huge barrier is a policy that is still law in the United States called Section 14C, which permits employers to pay all disabled workers sub-minimum wage. However, mostly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and other more significant disabilities are the ones subjected to these practices. So in 2024, the Biden administration proposed to phase this out. This was withdrawn by the Trump administration in 2025. There have been 16 states to ban places like sheltered workshops that can pay people cents on the dollar rather than minimum wage. New Jersey is not one of those states. So we continue to see a lot of this sub-minimum wage in New Jersey. Um, so I have two slides that are sort of similar but present the other. Both kind of sides of the argument here. And this is put together by a researcher who's got a great website named Michael McSheehan. The link for this is also here with a whole bunch of other websites. So you might want to look through some more of his really great and useful resources on inclusion. But you can see this is all very research based. The footnotes here are all links to, peer-reviewed research studies that show that these are in fact true. So you can see that, first of all, the IDEA presumes that the first placement option for a child should be the regular classroom. It shouldn't be that, oh, you have this label, therefore this is the classroom you go to, although that is often how it works in practice, especially in New Jersey. And so, unfortunately, many IEP teams don't make individualized placement decisions. Instead, they use what we call categorical thinking, to make a determination of where a student is educated and then what kind of curriculum they're going to access. So the following are benefits associated with general education, which means there is proof in research that shows that students who are in gen ed receive higher math and reading scores. Their literacy, math, communication skills increase. Their social skills increase. They have more participation in school and community groups. more social contacts, more preparedness for higher education and career opportunities, more likelihood of gaining competitive employment and living outside of family or other group living situations, lower likelihood of you being restrained or secluded in schools. And then the quality of services tends to improve, less distracting environments, more age-appropriate environments, more access to peer models that are positive for their behavior, learning, and communication, more peer support, more general education teacher accesses who are content experts, more likelihood of achieving individualized goals, less instructional time from less qualified instructionals. And not to say that paraprofessionals aren't great, but those can also come with a student into an inclusive environment, lower likelihood of educators focusing on other adults, lower frequency of non-academic instruction, and more students instruction. So, if someone claims to say that there are potential harmful effects of more time in gen ed, ask to see the research, is the advice from Michael. And I'm not going to read this because it's literally the same, but I like this one a lot too, because it shows all of the same information that I just showed you, which is research based, but it shows it from the perspective of the harm that segregation causes students. Um, and so I wanted to then connect the dots because of the focus of this wonderful symposium, and talk a little bit about mental health and how inclusion and mental health come together. So the World Health Organization, which is through the UN, um, defines mental health as a state of well-being where individualized, realized abilities are able to cope with stressors and contribute to their communities. So certain approaches for safeguarding mental health and education include helping learners feel safe, respected, and connected. That there is an opportunity to build emotional and social skills, that students can recognize distress early, and that they get responses supportively, that we know how to refer learners to appropriate services, and that we also are promoting the well-being of teachers and staff, and that there's opportunity to build a positive sense of identity in individuals. A comprehensive approach goes beyond being responsive. It must include promotion, prevention, early intervention, and care tailored to each context. And so I think when we look at these elements, we can see how inclusion, being around your same age peers, learning the same information, getting access to the same information, can promote well-being, mental well-being, where segregation and exclusion can really be harmful to an individual's sense of development, identity, growth. So why culture and inclusion matter for mental health? Mental health is shaped by social and cultural environments. One's gender, their identity, their ability, and background all influence how mental health challenges are experienced and addressed in schools. So when learners are supported emotionally, they're more likely to stay in school, they are more likely to be engaged in what they're learning and thrive. If the school's role, promoting mental health is central to a school's mission or should be. Unsafe environments and experiences like segregation, isolation, and bullying can double the risk of loneliness and distress that individuals encounter. And then there are really big systematic barriers. Children with disabilities or children from marginalized backgrounds often face exclusion, which can impact their sense of well-being and sense of belonging. So inclusive support means recognizing diverse realities and ensuring that every learner feels safe, seen, and supported. All right. I also think that this has always been a concept once it was introduced to me that's been really helpful for me to think about how identity and disability kind of play out in our educational environments and in many of our social environments. And so as I'm sure you all who are here understand, is disability is just one part of who any person is, right? Every person has a myriad of identities. Maybe they identify as a male, maybe they identify as black, maybe they identify as disabled, and maybe they're a parent, maybe they're Muslim, and so on, right? There's many, many aspects of what makes up who a person is. However, because of how we treat disability in schools, it often becomes seen as the only identity category that really matters in how we structure their entire schooling experience. So that's what Norm Coons and Emma Vandercliff, who, if you ever actually have a minute to look them up, Norm Kuntz has cerebral palsy. They're both Canadian, and they're disability rights activists and authors and scholars. They both do great, great work and presentations. And so they wrote this piece that talks about the disability spread. So they talk about how disability, even though it should be proportional to all the other parts of who a person is, our institutions make spread this part of one's identity, and it becomes almost the only thing we see and respond to in our society and in our schools. And so disability, first of all, becomes responded to usually in a really negative way, right? That's the reason we segregate people. It's the reason we cut off access to information and curriculum. It's what we use to make most large decisions. And even though disability can be a positive part of one's identity, we often are too afraid to discuss this in our educational settings and environments. Um, and so when we think about inclusion, this can minimize the impact of identity, especially when we do inclusion well, when we really think about structuring our educational practices in ways that support all students to learn together and have conversations about building community and honoring each other's differences. So we want to reduce that kind of master status spread. Um, we also often are really afraid to talk about disability as an identity category in schools. We use a lot of euphemisms or language to talk around disability, and there's a lot of debates within the disability community about, whether we should be using person first language, like person with a disability, or identity first language, like, for instance, autistic person or disabled person. People who believe that they prefer identity first language often think that disability should not be seen as a dirty word. But in schools, a lot of the time, we don't use the word disability at all, right? We'll use special needs, we'll use differently abled, we'll use the inclusion kids. We'll talk about, even if they're in a self-contained classroom, we'll talk about kids in every way we possibly can without using the word disability. So a lot of teachers hold beliefs that students don't notice differences, even though most research shows that even at really, really young ages, kids do indeed notice differences. Um, Teachers feel that not noticing disability is a good thing and an unbiased way of relating to students. And a lot of teachers feel that they're not well equipped to talk about disability. However, the reality is when we don't talk about disability, that silence and that way of talking around it actually reinforces exclusion and prevents meaningful inclusion and causes harm to people's sense of self and identity because they don't know why they're being treated the way they're being treated by the systems. They don't understand why they're being pulled out. They only know that this is a negative thing. And so we want to think about talking about disability in positive ways. So I'm going to share a little bit. This might feel like a jump, but I think it'll all come together. So I'm going to share a little bit about inclusive post-secondary education, which is, as was noted, I and my colleague Susan Baglieri developed some programs at Montclair State, and I'm not sure if our director, Kat Leonard, is here. She was maybe going to come, but she's also helping run the Certificate in General Education Studies program. And so inclusive post-secondary education is a framework for students with intellectual disabilities to participate in higher education. In some ways, it has become, in a way, an antidote to our really segregated systems because it gives young people who have often been segregated their entire lives the opportunity to be around their same-aged peers on a college campus in a pivotal time of development, right? Young adulthood is a time where all people grow and become, really understand themselves a lot. Also, it is an opportunity for people who have often rarely accessed high-level academic content to experience college campus academic work and with appropriate support and often with the option to take courses for we do pass fail, some universities do audit. So inclusive post-secondary education is an opportunity to experience inclusive academics, develop employment skills and activities of daily living in an age-appropriate environment. Um, we have a strong emphasis in our programs on inclusive infrastructure. So the programming as part of the broader college or university is offering an infrastructure. We believe that the presence of students with intellectual disabilities on campuses add identity and value to the full campus. It benefits everybody. The students without disabilities or without intellectual disabilities who act as peer companions, peer supports, gain a lot of understanding and perspective and ability to see people with intellectual disabilities as their peers and equals in ways that segregation can never do. Um, and so our students take inclusive college credits, so they're sitting alongside their same age peers in regular college classes, participating, and people are gaining skills aligned to their interests and goals in an inclusive environment that offers appropriate supports and opportunities. And there are, as I noted, we most programs, including ours, engage in both structured and unstructured opportunities with their same age peers. So the way we do that is we actually pair up student volunteers with one-on-one. So students are getting to know another person and going sometimes they have support in class from a same age peer if they choose it. The students self-direct these decisions, so they're not given a peer unless they request and want one. Other times peers are for social reasons, to hang out, go to lunch, go to the gym, go to a club, etc. And then there's, of course, unstructured time with same age peers because they're on a college campus and they're around many other young adults. So just for some more context, the U.S. government has been investing in inclusive post-secondary programs since 2008. So in 2008, there was a category in under the Higher Education Act, which is essentially a federal financial aid category called Comprehensive Transition Program. And so we actually at Montclair just received this status, CTP status, so that now our students can receive financial aid to attend our university through our program. And they are designed, CTP status is designed to give educational access and opportunities and funding to students with intellectual disabilities. And I think that says most of it. There's also been a grant program that has been going on since 2010. And so these are 5-year grant programs helped to design the institutions of higher ed to create inclusive and sustainable model programs. So there have been many millions of dollars over the last 20 years to support the development of best practices in inclusive post-secondary education. There is also it's called Think College. It's a national coordinating center that also supports the development of best programs and supporting programs. And so I'm just giving you a few outcomes, but so as I noted earlier, right, people with intellectual disabilities don't have very low employment rates, right, with limited working hours, low wages, even when they are employed. Um, one really positive outcome, and there's actually a lot of research on the Think College website if you want to look into more about the successes for students who have gone through a college program. But we can see that their employment rates in integrated and competitive programs are much higher. 67% of respondents to 3 years after for the model demonstration programs still had paid jobs in their local communities. A quarter of the respondents often continued in higher education. Um, I will proudly say that we have several of our recent graduates of our first cohort who are continuing at Montclair State and other higher ed programs. So that's very exciting for us to see that actually coming to life, including in moving from our program into a degree program. And 92% of respondents reported that they were satisfied with their social life after completing a program, which is much higher than your average life satisfaction surveys for this population of adults. And so this is a growing movement across the United States. Um, so here's a little information on the national landscape. There are over 360 programs at this point in 49 states. Wyoming, I think, is the one state that has not started a program. There's a great deal of variability in terms of how the programs are structured and run, which makes sense because all universities are different. Although some of the programs are less integrated than others, some may not have as much opportunity for inclusive learning. But all of them exist on college campuses and do have some interactions with the broader university. New Jersey hosts 13 programs, including ours. So these are the 13 programs here in New Jersey. So you can see there's a range of them across the state. Um, the one that has been around the longest is definitely the College of New Jersey. They have been around for almost 50 years. Some of the programs are residential, some of them are commuter. Ours at Montclair is a commuter program. Although we have future goals to become residential as we continue to grow. We have only finished our second year of our certificate program. Um, but we have had a longer history of building towards the certificate program at Montclair. So as I noted, my colleague Sue and I started these programs together. We started with the IAC programs, which stands for Increasing Access to College. So we've been doing this work for about a decade now, which is in collaboration with 18 to 21 transition programs out of high schools. So we collaborate now with various local high schools. We collaborate with Bloomfield Public Schools, Montclair Public Schools, Patterson Public Schools, and we have newer partnerships with Cedar Grove. So so the students who do IAC are in one of these two programs. So um, they can come for one semester and take a course that is co-sat with teacher education students. And this is essentially a free opportunity to just kind of explore college and what college is. And the students in the teacher ed programs create opportunities for the young adults to learn about what college is, and they work collaboratively on different projects. The fellowship is up for the same group of students. It's a 1 year program, and the students can choose a course that they're interested in and audit the course each semester. And in this program, students get full campus access. They get a student ID. They can use all campus facilities, and they may have some scheduled peer partners based on interests. And this is a pretty low cost program that the school districts pay for. And then the third program, which is our newer program and our fully integrated program, is a 2 year certificate program. The students do not have to be part of a partner high school program. They have to be anywhere from 18 to 25, and they pay standard Montclair State tuition for the courses that they take on campus. So that's a little bit about what we offer. As I think I already mentioned all of this. So Admissions is that for students who are 18 to 25 who are interested in a college experience, and students must have reliable transportation because we are a commuter-based campus, and students must have an intellectual disability label. And the main thing we really actually look for at our admissions is whether the students themselves can show interest and desire for college learning and academic learning. Um, so our program is a 2-year program with 36 to 41 credits. Most courses carry 3 credits with options ranging from 1 to 4. And the components of our program are that students take general courses that explore the learning arts. And then we have a series of core courses that our program runs that are focused on student success who are in our program. And then they choose a concentration area, which we've modeled after what's called the Discovery Program that undeclared students at Montclair State go into. So they do have a focus kind of akin to a major. And then they do an internship component at the end of their program, their last semester, in an area of their own job ambition and growth. And they also have some electives that they take. And we also do person-centered planning with our students and the families of the students once per year. And then again at the end, before they exit, a transition person-centered planning meeting. So everything, all the decisions about which courses students take, what their internships are like, how they spend their social and recreational time on campus is very individualized and based on the students' goals and ambitions. So some of the philosophical commitments that drive our work is that college learning should be accessible to all who desire it. That college campuses should serve all members of the communities in which they're located. That diversity of identity um, and experience adds value to the full campus community. That communities and individuals thrive on interdependence, where they're working together, that we can all do more with the support of one another, and that students with and without disability labels benefit from engaging in mutually beneficial and reciprocal relationships. So these are some pictures of our students over the years. Um, I also think there's a lot of benefits that, sometimes are the less tangible, right? So we know that we all, especially for those of you who went to college yourself, probably gained some skills when you were in college. You probably gained some knowledge when you were in college. But there's also a lot of access to resources. There's a lot of access to exploring oneself, one's identity. And you also expand social networks to a great degree when you're in an institution of higher ed, right? A lot of times it's said, right? It's not always what you know, but it's who you know. And so college campuses and learning alongside same age peers can really increase one's social network. And we've seen those social relationships being able to, continue after the students leave the university. And there's also continued institutional resources for career exploration, for advancement. And I'm going to talk a little bit too about the mental health resources available on a college campus that can really set a strong foundation for one's future. So other things a college can offer everyone, a chance to explore academic ideas that were not available in high school, a chance to explore liberal arts and major industry specific courses, which can lead to new understandings of self and career. We've seen a lot of our students actually, which is really typical. They've come in thinking that they're going to be a graphic designer or, they're going to be a computer technician, and then they take a class in that area or do some more career exploration activities with our career staff at the university and realize that those careers are actually not the ones that they want, and they pivot, and that's a really wonderful way of finding a different path and evolving as a person. We see students learning about their skills a lot more when they get into an internship in an area that they hadn't tried before. So we see that happens a lot, that evolution of self. There's a lot of chance to explore their own identity. Our campus has hundreds and hundreds of clubs in any identity category you could imagine. So sometimes students will, learn more about who they are through participating in clubs or recreational activities, sports, and so on. A lot of campuses do have dorm living for students with intellectual disabilities, which gives them a great opportunity to grow in their inter and independent living skills. There's possibility to continue into degree programs and chances to make our campuses and worlds more inclusive. Um, and just a little bit more bringing back the piece about mental health. Especially and doing this work for quite a long time and seeing, and I know I only have 5 minutes and I am actually almost done. um, Seeing a lot of our students who have been segregated throughout their whole life, not developing social skills in the same way as their non-disabled peers, not because they don't have the capacity to, but because they have not had the exposure to learning how to exist around other people. We have seen really, in a lot of ways, I will say, some gaps in just skill acquisition around how to approach relationships, how to approach friendships, how to approach romantic relationships. And so, I think being on a campus in some ways can be both a really big opportunity to develop those things, but also it can be tough, right? When you're all of a sudden around all these people that you haven't been exposed to before. And so we've made a lot of great use out of some of our resources on our campus for students to access mental health resources. So we have CAPS, which is our Center for Counseling and Psychological Services on our campus. We've had quite a few students take advantage of those services that are free, free for a certain number of sessions, but then they really do help outsource to permanent counseling too. And our campus has heavily invested in free resources for ongoing therapy as well. We have specialized counseling groups around even social skill development that students can use. Our campus has tons of resources, events all the time on promoting mental health. Our students have free access to the Calm app, some mindfulness resources. We have a program where students and faculty can get trained on being a mental health first responder. So students are just accessing all of these things they wouldn't have if they weren't on our campus. Like I already said, there's so many different clubs and organizations that can increase their sense of self because they're around other students who are traditionally enrolled, who are going through similar, issues that young adults go through. We do have one specific organization, Disability Rights, Education, Activism, and Mentorship. That's a club we've had a few students participate in. Our students have full access to our amazing fitness facilities for physical well-being, and their social life and their academic worlds just expand and explode in on a college campus. So those are some of the other benefits from just having the access. Um, so what can person, no matter where you all are or work, um, you know, everybody I think can play a role in promoting a more inclusive society and world. So I think, wherever you are, spend time thinking about ways to create space intentionally for people with intellectual disabilities to have meaningful participation. If you work somewhere, maybe you want to think about having an intern or hiring somebody with an intellectual disability. I think the way we talk about people with disabilities in our interpersonal conversations can help shift deficit and ableist mindsets. I think just getting to know people and not thinking about them through a deficit lens, but just kind of getting to know them as a whole person. Thinking about ways to create cultures of access and support for all people, no matter where we work. Creating opportunities for community building and sharing across differences. So that is my talk, and I'm right about 45 minutes, which is great. So we have I think 15 minutes if anybody has any questions. And I see that there is one
Thank you,
question.
Dr. Bacon, for your presentation. We really appreciate it. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A section. So the first question is, they're asking if your research is based on younger students, including polling students, and if so, how were participants chosen?
Thank you for the question. So this presentation was not based on a specific research study. Although I would love to share a link. I actually just published a book, but that book is actually not. It's about young adults, and actually 14 to 21 year olds, and how curricular access in school inclusion impacts the development into adulthood. Um, and I do qualitative research. So I mostly do interviews or observations with individuals. I'm going to put the book in the chat. I appreciate the question. I actually hadn't come out before I put this presentation together, so that's why there's a. So as I pull that up, and actually I'm going to just stop sharing because that's probably easier. Um, So, any other questions? Okay. Um, so,
So what is the next question is, what is the title of the book?
yes, and I am putting that in the chat right now. I'm trying to get the publisher's site because, I don't love to give out Amazon's links. Um, so I'm going to pull that up and I can move on to the next question as I do that.
Okay. Next question is, what are some other examples of inclusive practices that will help foster positive disability identity?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of, and I'm not sure if Dr. Lavani touched on this much in her talk, because Dr. Lavani and I have actually written about this together. We have published a few articles. So one thing is literature, right? There's literature for little kids. There's literature for young adults. There's literature for that is more catered towards adults. Um, and not all literature has a positive representation. So there's actually a lot of great resources out there that have curated recommendations, especially for kids and teens, about disability literature that gives a positive representation of disability and can open up conversations for kids to talk about disability in ways that can really help them. Also, bringing in guest speakers that have lived experiences who have had successful lives, right? So having positive role models for young people to see that their future could really be positive, even if all around them is more negative um, representation. So those are a few ideas for how to do that. Um,
Thank you so much for answering that question. We have another one. Are there any best practices for inclusion that you can share that like are often overlooked?
Yeah. So I would say, I'm also a professor in teacher education. And so I teach future teachers to be teachers about, and I'm putting the link in right now. Sorry, it took a second for me to pull it up. But, ooh, that's a really long, why is that link? Sorry, this is there we go. This is a better link. It's not so long. So I'm very, very pleased to share my book with you all. There you go. So, um, yeah, so in teacher education, I would say the foundational work that we try to do with people who, especially mostly at Montclair, you can imagine most of our students have gone through New Jersey schools their whole lives, because we attract mostly New Jersey students, and so they're pretty embedded in having lived segregation throughout their lives. So the first thing we really spend time on is actually ideology. Like, what do you know about disability? What has society taught you about disability? And we try to help them essentially unlearn what they've learned and have new perspectives. So a lot of stories from the perspectives of people with disabilities, a lot of work on the social model and the social model and application to teaching. And then, of course, the other thing we spend a lot of time on is pedagogy, or how to teach. So what are some practices that can be, high leverage when you have students with more significant disabilities learning alongside maybe students who are considered to be advanced or gifted learners. So universal design for learning is a framework that we teach, differentiated instruction, and then how to actually embed curriculum. So while helping students gain individualized skills that they need without having to remove them from a learning activity, or so how can we embed like social skills into a learning activity that an individual might need, and how do we modify instruction and accommodate students through different technologies, different modalities. So that's some of what we do in our teacher education programs to help people learn how to teach more inclusively. And I would say, and at the college level, I also try to model those same practices, for both students in our inclusive post-secondary programs and our students, who are in our traditional programs. I do teach a few classes where we integrate those two groups of students, which is really fun, and they do projects together, and so it's a great experience for everybody. Um, so hopefully that helps. Um,
That was a
any
great. Any more questions?
I know I'm towards the end of a longer day for you all, so
Dr. Bacon, this is Catherine Carmichael, Executive Director at Nutley Family, and I just want to thank you so much for doing this presentation for us today. You shared so many resources. Are they all included in your presentation slides, or is there additional um,
great
res
question.
resources that you could, share
Yeah.
us, point to where we could find them?
A lot of them are included, but there's certainly many more that I could pull and follow up with. I would say the evolved, just I try to pull some ones that are more easy to use if you're not an academic. So that's why I like Mike Machines, which is this website that I showed you all, um, because I think that he has a lot of great, easy to use, easy to share resources, and he distills a lot of research-based information. I think that becomes really usable. But certainly, and then I would say the Think College website, which I'm also going to put in the chat. If you're interested in more information about inclusive post-secondary education, this is the go-to spot for that. They have everything from information for families, for students, for people who want to build programs. They have research on here. They have movies. So it's a great resource for inclusive post-secondary education. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it's great. It's just that you have so much to share, and I love to, you know, have all these resources to go and learn more. I mean, I feel like we can never get enough, um, resources in this area because it's just so important. And I feel like for so many years there wasn't, there just wasn't anything, much happening. Um,
Yeah.
So
I'm with you. I'm going to
as
share one more organizational resource. I'm actually on the board of TASH. I don't know if anybody's heard of it before. It's been around for 50 years, and it is a national organization that fights for the rights of people with significant disabilities. And they do policy work. They do publish. So they run several journals. There's an annual conference, which is actually in Philadelphia, so pretty close to home if you're in New Jersey in December. So that might be another resource that could be helpful too.
this is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Catherine. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. I appreciate it. Oh, Kat is here. Catherine Leonard is the director of the CJES program, so she's also in the audience. So I have to give her a shout out for much of what I said.